I now request respected Professor Sabyasachi Bhattacharya to give an introduction to the conference.
Esteemed Swami Prabhanandaji, Swami Bhajanananda, Dr. Ramachandra, representing Dr. Kapila Vatsayan, Swami Subarandaji, and the assembled scholars, highly distinguished scholars who have come from different parts of India, and friends. I've been asked by Kapilaji to say a few words on how I look at this conference as a historian, and also in her absence I played some small part in helping to put together, to organize the conference, and she has profusely thanked me with a degree of exaggeration that I can only attribute to a friendship. All I can do is just to share with you a few thoughts which cross my mind as I look at this conference, and also my reflections on Volume 7, which is at the focus of this conference. I look upon this Volume 7, which has been, as has been said earlier, which was a kind of culmination of the work of about 75 years. I look upon it, published in 2006, as a volume which stands at the Tribeni Sangama, at the confluence of three cultural traditions. First is the nationalist school, which began to talk about, which began the discourse of individuality of Indian art and taught Indians to value that individuality at a time when, under colonial auspices, institutions and sometimes intellectuals tended to forget that. Second, I see a stream of tradition that came from the various government agencies, not only the Archaeological Survey of India, not only the museum set up by the government, but also the ICS officers, the officers of the Government of India, going back to even people like Prinsep and Fleet and others who worked in the Asiatic Society soon after it was set up by Sir William Jones. That is also, there's a second tradition of art studies. And the third is the academic one, which began with the development of art history in the universities. And that was a latecomer on the scene. That was only from about, say, 1910s and 20s. If you look at the earliest, the nationalist stream of studies, we have their great personalities, like Sister Nivedita, who's the subject of one important contribution to our conference today. We have Ananda Kentish Kumaraswamy, we have Abanindranath Tagore, and such great personalities. And parallel to this work, we had in the preceding decade, the work of people like Cabell or Percy Brown and many others of the British bureaucracy, who initially contributed mainly towards epigraphy, chronology, and so forth, but who very soon also contributed to cultural studies. And then we have the one we are more familiar with, the academic stream, which brings to mind great names like those of Stella Kramrisch, Hermann Goetz, or O.C. Ganguly, Nirmal Kumar Bose, Alice Bohner, Niharanjan Ray, Shashi Kumar Saraswati, C. Shivaram Murthy, or say M.K. Dhavalikar, B.N. Mukherjee, Fortunath Mukherjee, and many others, of whom some contributed to this volume, and in fact a few are present here today. So it is these three traditions which I think meet at a confluence in this volume 7. And I would particularly look forward to the reflections that I hope to listen to from experts in the field in this regard. However, before we do that, I think it will be not inappropriate to look at what was Swami Vivekananda's approach to the history of art. Swami Vivekananda emphasized how Swami Vivekananda underlined, gave great importance to the notion of cultural unity of India. Now, more specifically on the history of Indian art, Swami Vivekananda did make various remarks and wrote about it in some of his essays, especially if you look at the collected works, volumes 4 and 5 and 7, you will see a good deal of reports on his conversations. For instance, his conversation with the artist Narada Prasad Gupta, who was trained in the Calcutta School of Arts under E.B. Havell. Then he set up his own school of art called the Jubilee School of Art, and he interviewed Swamiji, and this happened in 1901 in Belur. Or Swamiji's conversation with Sister Nivedita, which have been reported by her in some wanderings with Swami Vivekananda. And you recall that these were conversations that took place in 1898 in Kashmir and in Punjab. Or you look at Swamiji's conversation with P.N. Sinha, which you find in selected works. Or if you go further, if you look at the early volumes of Udbodhana, Udbodhan, published some of his writings, particularly his travel memoirs. And in the Memoirs of European Travel, 1899-1900, you see Swamiji talking extensively about the art tradition of Europe, particularly Greek art, page after page. And above all, we must recall that the first work published by Narendranath Datta was on what Swamiji later said is the highest form of art. It was on music. And this book, Sangita Kalpataru, edited in collaboration with Vaishnav Chandra Bosak, really deserves much more attention than it has received till now. I particularly consider it very important because he begins with a scientific exposition. As a physicist, he looks at music as vibration. And it's really a very unique piece of work that you have there. All I want to say is that these are really, in many scattered places, we have Swamiji's thoughts on art. But I will just try to sum up in the few minutes I have. Already we have exceeded time because of starting late. I would just like very quickly to sum up what are, I think, the three basic ideas that Swami Vivekananda puts forward in his various reflections and writings. And I'll read out now to save time. First, he believed that Western art generally focused upon the accurate portrayal of nature, while Indian art found it was more important to focus on ideas. So this nature and idea contraposition he makes in several comments. I quote him, for instance, "The secret of Greek art is its imitation of nature, even to the minutest detail. Whereas the secret of Indian art is to represent the ideal," unquote. Then Swamiji says that art is of course related with nature, but it need not reproduce nature. I quote him again, "True art can be compared to a lily, the flower, to a lily which springs from the ground, takes its nourishment from the ground, and yet it is quite high above it. So art must be in touch with nature, yet it must be above nature," unquote. So in this manner, Swamiji proposed that we must look at Indian art as a representation of an idea that was transcendental. The second idea, I think, which you find in his writings quite often, is that an artistic sensibility, which was truly traditional and indigenous, found expression in common objects of everyday use in India, made by artisans, in the architecture of homes of the villages, in the painting on their mud walls, in the work of common bricklayers and carpenters. With the Western education, here I quote him again, the Westerner looks for utility in everything, whereas with us, art is everywhere. With the Western education, those beautiful koti, the pitcher that we use for water, those beautiful kotis of ours have been discarded, and enamel glasses have usurped their place in our homes, unquote. This is from volume 5. Vivekananda believed that the Japanese knew how to combine utility and beauty. Like India, Japan knows great art, for, I quote him, "The very soul of the Asian is interwoven with art," unquote. He also thought that in India, the British brought an utilitarian approach, and especially he condemned the government buildings, and he says that the British built buildings which have no meaning. To quote his words, they are commonplace, meaningless, unsymbolical. And in 1902, Vivekananda had long conversations in Banaras with Prince Okakura, the famous Japanese art critic, who played an important role in bridging Indian and Japanese art traditions. Okakura particularly held in admiration Indian artisans' work like terracotta objects and water vessels. In fact, he took away from Swamiji some water vessels, some ghodas he had in his home. He also invited Vivekananda to visit Japan, and Swamiji could not make it, although the passage had been paid for by Okakura. And anyway, this was towards the end of Swamiji's life. I go on to the third idea, which I think is important, and this is the idea that India must avoid imitation of Western art. He spoke extensively on this when the artist Ranadhar Prasad Gupta sought an interview with him. I quote Swamiji, "Art has its origin in the expression of some idea in whatever man produces. In our country, attempts to give expression to original ideas in art are no longer seen." As you said, one time they were seen, but not anymore. For example, he tells his artist, "For example, paintings from your art school have got no expression, as it were," unquote. Each people, Swamiji said, have their own stock of ideas and art forms, and imitation of other people does not produce true art. In his famous work, Pracho Paschatto, Vivekananda made the same point. What has India gained from the West? what really useful science or art have you acquired? He asked of modern India. The answer was obvious, there was none that India had gained. And a very important passage where he wrote, by imitating the Europeans, we at the utmost can only produce one or two Ravi Varmas amongst us. But far better than such artists are our Batuas, unquote. Anyway, so to sum it up, at the end, I would say that Swami Vivekananda suggested that the aim of Indian art was different from Western art. For the artist in classical India aimed at expressing a transcendental idea, not copying nature. Secondly, in perceiving art in objects of everyday use made by rural artisans, Vivekananda anticipated the views later elaborated by Kumaraswamy and others. Further, in condemning the imitation of Western art by Indian artists, Swami Vivekananda anticipated the Bengal school and its proponents like Avandranath Tagore, E.B. Havell, or O.C. Ganguly. Although Swami Vivekananda's writings and pronouncements on Indian art are scattered in many places in his writings, and he never elaborated those ideas in extended discussions, he developed an approach which later found expression in the writings of the nationalist school of Indian art history. Thus, Swami Vivekananda may be regarded as the intellectual progenitor of the nationalist school. Thank you.
Today we have amongst us Revered Swami Bhajananandji Maharaj, Assistant Secretary, Ramakrishna Math and Ramakrishna Mission, Belur Math. I humbly request Revered Maharaj to give the keynote address of this session.
Respected Vice President